My name is Eileen Graham. Hi, everybody. My name is Eileen Graham. I'm the Senior Executive Assistant and Policy Specialist at Treehouse. I'm really excited about today's live session. We're going to be talking about the 2020 legislative session and how we're continuing to advocate for needed policy change and investments of state funding for youth in foster care. And we're going to have this conversation with Dawn Rains. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat and we'll answer them as many as we can as we go. Dawn, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Rains. I'm the Chief Policy and Strategy Specialist here at Treehouse. I've been at Treehouse for 11 years, and in addition to doing foster care for my professional role, I am also a former foster parent.
Thanks, Dawn. So let's get started. The legislative session ended 42 days ago, which seems like forever with everything going on. Overall, it was a really great session for kids in foster care. Can you talk a little bit about what your job entails and what you do specifically when the legislature is in session?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of think of my role as creating the conditions for children and youth in foster care to succeed. We had countless examples of systems that did not support the educational needs of kids in foster care. Agencies that didn't align, coordinate, share data, partner effectively across systems. In many cases, there are no laws in place to help create those conditions for our youth to succeed in school. And we could do direct service programs all day long, but if we are constantly working against systems that are not rowing in the same direction, there's a good possibility we would not be able to achieve our goals on behalf of and alongside of young people. As an organization that's growing statewide, we knew we wanted to grow our advocacy footprint. For a long time, we really focused in the child welfare space, but we realized that we were not going to be able to help kids be successful in school if we did not also focus on the education side. We really took a big step a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and created this specific department within Treehouse. While we had been doing advocacy for a long time, this was a big new investment, and we think that it has really made a big difference in our ability to tell our story to elected officials and make sure that they understand the needs of kids in care, and that we are an important voice, kind of the experts in that space where we have the intersection of foster care and education. So during session, I'm doing things like having legislator meetings to make sure that they understand kids' needs and they know what we are asking them for. I participate in a lot of coalition and colleague meetings to make sure that we're aligning as much as we possibly can and amplifying each other's voices. Attending lots of and testifying at committee meetings of the legislature, so in both the House and the Senate. We tend to focus on the education committees and the human services committees, but also the budget committees. That's where a lot of the important decisions get made. We're tracking various bills through the session. And then we're also asking our community to engage, to take action on behalf of youth in foster care. So that's kind of the scope of my role.
Thanks. So one of the things that we were most proud of this last session was passing the Achieving Educational Success for Foster and Homeless Students Act. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was kind of our big lift for the session, House Bill 2711. This bill is going to continue some really important work that has been happening for the last couple of years called Project Education Impact. And this is a group of 4 state agencies and 4 statewide nonprofit organizations that have been working together toward a very big goal, which is that youth in foster care and youth experiencing homelessness will achieve educational outcomes at the same rate as their peers, all the way from pre-K through post-secondary. So it's kind of taking the Treehouse goal of high school graduation at the same rate as their peers and kind of amplifying it, both in terms of the populations and also the age range. So this bill now puts into law that we all have to be at the table together, working together to achieve this goal until 2024, which we're super excited about. This also, the bill added a couple of different players to the table as well. We will be welcoming 4 legislators to the table, which we think will only increase our effectiveness and our ability to achieve both the policy and investments that we need to forward this work.
Thanks. So the Department of Children, Youth, and Families is the one that oversees child welfare in Washington State. And when it was first formed 2 years ago, one of our biggest hopes was that it would prioritize the needs of adolescents. Can you tell us about a big win that happened around that this session?
Yeah, absolutely. The new Department of Adolescent Programs at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families is just getting off the ground. They have a new director named Jess Lewis. We were super excited that Jess was named to this role because we had been working with them for a long time in a couple of roles at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And Jess is a champion for kids and totally understands not only do they have professional expertise, they are also foster parent for adolescents. And they always say, please give me the hardest kids, the kids that need the most support. And so Jess is someone who really gets it. And so the exciting news is that the legislature approved 2 new staff positions to help build out that department, one focused on equity and one focused on integrating adolescents or programs affecting adolescents throughout the agency. So these roles will focus not only on children, or the youth in foster care, but also adolescents in the juvenile rehabilitation system. So youth who are currently incarcerated, which is an important thing for us.
TRIAS's legislative agenda is informed by various state agencies and nonprofit partners. And one of the groups that you've been meeting with is the Concerned Lifers organization. Can you talk about who they are and what they do?
Yeah, I've really had a privilege of working with the Concerned Lifers organization for the last 3 years or so. It is a group of men. It's actually an organization that has existed inside the Monroe Correctional Complex I think they have a history of about 30 or 40 years of meeting together. It consists of men who are incarcerated and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, or have sentences so long that they are unlikely to outlive them. Within that group, they have a kind of a subgroup they call themselves the state-raised group. And I have to tell you, the first time I heard that phrase, it stopped me in my tracks. They don't call themselves men who experienced foster care when they were growing up. They have a point of view that they were raised by the state and trained to be institutionalized. And so, over the last 3 years, this is really a project that was initiated by them. Even from where they sit, they have intention to make a positive difference in their communities. In particular, they were tired of seeing new inmates arrive at the prison every week who had grown up in foster care or had foster care experience. And so now we work with them on a regular basis to help inform our policy agenda and program strategies.
Can you talk a bit more about how TRIAS has brought their work specifically into our everyday policy work?
Yeah, in December, we had an incredible convening where we brought together people who work in the child welfare arena, the education arena, the juvenile justice arena, law enforcement, the courts, to really all come together for the first time to talk about the foster care, what we're calling the foster care to prison pipeline. I think a lot of people don't know that of the youth who are currently incarcerated in the juvenile justice system, 40% of them have been in foster care, and 80% of their families have had interaction with the child welfare system. So it is a huge, the juvenile justice system is of huge importance to us. These are kids who, were failed by the foster care system, and then the education system, and then the juvenile justice system to end up in adult corrections. And it's not to make an excuse for anything any of them have done, and they don't make excuses. But when you hear their stories, you kind of wonder how they could have ended up anywhere else. And so one of the policy things that they were very excited about this session was a bill to eliminate the use of solitary confinement with young people. And that bill passed. All the evidence says that it is sort of a cruel and unusual punishment, particularly for youth. And so we're super excited that that one passed, and we're excited to, I was excited to visit them after end of session and tell them about that win.
I had the opportunity to attend that convening, and it is such a powerful thing to hear individuals who have actually been affected by systems and hear their voices and hear how they want the systems to change. So thank you for leading that work for Treehouse, at least. So we touched on a lot of the things that happened during the session, and obviously everything has changed with the pandemic. How did COVID-19 affect the bills that the governor signed and the final state budget?
Well, a lot of people may not know that once the session ends, the governor has 20 days to sign the budget that was passed into law by the legislature. And in that process, he has a couple of options. He can veto bills, he can, or he can sign bills. Within the budget bill itself, the governor really only had two strategies. So when the legislative session ended, you might recall in the last week, they initially approved $100 million from the state's rainy day fund to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And then just a few days later, they increased that number to 200 million. And so the state already knew kind of right at the end of the session that this was going to be a major issue. So the governor, if you were watching the news, made about $445 million in cuts. He could only do two things by statute. He could veto any new spending that was appropriated by the legislature, or he could require across the board cut. So he could say every department has to take a 10% cut. He elected to do some very specific vetoes in the budget. Luckily, many of the investments so many of the wins that we had in the foster care child welfare space were spared. One of the lenses that he was using to make those decisions are what is going to be critical to respond to the COVID-19 crisis? How do we make sure that our most vulnerable citizens and residents of our state are able to get the support that they need during this time? So the good news is that a lot of the funding specific to kids in foster care was not impacted in that first round of cuts. Yes. If you have any questions, don't forget to enter them in the chat as we go, and Dawn will try and answer them as we go. So I know Treehouse programs are adapting to meet the emerging needs of youth in care during this time, and we'll talk more about that in next week's Facebook Live. But what does your work look like right now in the policy and systems change space? We were joking today that I've probably done 3 or 4 things, major kind of projects this week that I didn't actually even see coming last week because things are changing so quickly. So when school closures first happened, we were immediately concerned about our seniors and what was going to happen in terms of them meeting their graduation requirements. Some of our youth are working really hard to get those final credits, may not look on paper like they're on track to graduate. So one of the very first things we did was advise on the State Board of Education's rules around graduation waivers. So the school districts could apply for waivers for seniors, which they could then grant to individual students, but there needed to be some rules around how that was done. And so we made sure that they took into account all the specific conditions that our youth in foster care face, and really, I think, improved the final rules outcome. And then I've been spending a lot of time reaching out to legislators, letting them know what our youth are experiencing, how Treehouse is responding, and basically providing them with the information that they need to know to make good policy and funding decisions. We've been, in order to do that, in addition to our day-to-day service, we have surveyed foster care liaisons in the school districts. So they are working directly with young people and are letting us know what they're hearing in terms of young people's needs. And then we also did a survey of all of our education staff at Treehouse, which is about 70 people strong at this point, to understand what the individual needs of their young people are, so that we could pass that information on, both inform our own practice, but also pass that information on to lawmakers. One thing that's happening right now is that we are calling on the governor to make some adjustments in extended foster care. So right now, extended foster care is for youth who are 18 up to age 21. And after they turn 18, they can elect to stay in extended foster care, which is a really critical support to help them maybe finish their education or launch their careers. We have a whole group of youth who are 20 who will turn 21 sometime in the next year. And what we are calling on the governor to do is a moratorium on exiting kids from extended foster care right now. Our youth were among the first to lose their employment because many of them work in the service sectors, the retail, food industry, et cetera. And we want to make sure that they have stable housing and a safe place to be until this crisis starts to turn around. So that's the first thing. We want a moratorium. And then we want to, extended foster care has some requirements, which is that youth be engaged at least half time in school or work or job training or some other kind of program. And we wanted to have a temporary waiver for those requirements because, again, immediately when this all happened, when people started losing their jobs, our youth were among the first, and we were having to make individual appeals for young people that it's actually not their fault that they aren't meeting one of those qualifying conditions at the moment. So we'd like that to change. And then you might have been hearing about some of the federal stimulus packages that are coming down. So we are in the most recent CARES Act, there were some emergency education relief spending dollars that were coming down. Some of them are flexible dollars that the governor can use at his discretion, and some are going to school districts and the superintendent of public instruction. And so we are advocating that a significant portion of those education emergency kind of funding dollars be allocated to students who are furthest from opportunity, and specifically students in foster care and students experiencing homelessness. So we're calling on them to make some very specific investments during this time to make sure that our youth don't fall further behind.
So we have a question from the audience. Dawn, you have a background in fundraising and you also ran programs at Treehouse for a few years. Can you talk a bit about your transition to policy and advocacy, how that came about, and how much influence you and Treehouse have at the state level?
I'm kind of glad you asked that question. I would say that this role, this sort of policy role, is kind of a perfect combination of both fundraising and programs. So I have the opportunity to make long-term systemic difference for our kids by advocating. I also have the kind of opportunity to do that sort of external relationship building work that we do in fundraising. It's very much like the work that I do with and on behalf of legislators, sharing information about our youth and their needs and how they can make the most difference. Very similar in the fundraising world, and also using all of the program background that I have to do the same thing. And so it's kind of and I also get my own immediate gratification needs met because I get to pass bills and I get to secure funding for Treehouse. So those are something about my own motivation that I need to have those kind of annual wins. So that's been fun.
Definitely.
How much influence we have? I think we are probably regarded as the leading voice in the state around the educational needs of kids in foster care. And so when something comes up related to their educational needs, we are often the first call. We are regularly at tables with our colleagues at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. We are also working hand in glove with our foster care program manager at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And we also value working very closely with all of our partners who are in the foster care space, the education space, the housing and homelessness space, to make sure that we are collectively advancing the needs of our young people as much as we possibly can. So I would say we have quite a bit of influence.
And one final question, how can people get involved with our policy work?
So the one thing I would really urge you all to do is to go to the Treehouse website and join our Advocacy Action Center. We actually have an advocacy alert live right now about those adjustments in extended foster care. So I would love for you to take action on that piece. This next session coming up is going to be really, really important. You may know that about 80% of our state budget comes from sales tax and B&O tax. And because of the current economic crisis created by the pandemic, this next budget session is going to be really, really tough. And so we're going to need as many voices as we possibly can advocating to retain what is critical for kids in foster care. And so I hope you will join us in that effort.
Thank you so much, Dawn, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We're going to be doing Facebook Lives every Wednesday this month. Next Wednesday on April 29th at 12, please join us with Chief Programs Officer Angela Griffin and two of our directors, Linda Hall and Nicole Heron. They're going to talk about how we're serving youth during the pandemic, how Treehouse programs are adapting to the shifting needs of youth and young adults in care. And again, thank you so much for being here and hope you have a great rest of the day.